Hey guys, it's Garnet Blaze, and today I'm going to give you the behind the scenes of my map part in Battle Scars. Alright, so with this introductory part, I was mostly storyboarding the ideas I had. I knew I wanted to incorporate a leaf element because I thought it would be, a decent transition from the previous landscape to the jungle, rainforest. So here we have some sketches of Peacemaker jumping around, and to get the correct movement I actually looked at footage of deer hopping, and using that footage I was able to draft out the key poses, and then from there I could do this animation. In this shot it was a bit more simple because I didn't have to do any of the wings, but I have Faux Slayer and Moon talking. Fun fact, with the lip syncing, Moon is saying right here, alright, and then they both laugh. I thought that would be a good way to end it. It's a very short part, but I got all the elements I wanted. I wanted some transitional elements from the foreground to this middle ground and then the background. As you can see, Peacemaker hopping around back there. So, that's what the sketch looked like. So what I did is I separated these two animation layers. So that way we'd have the layer with Focalare and, or Hope, and Moon talking to each other, and then the other layer would have the animation for Peacemaker. And this was done so I could properly get the foreground background thing going on with minimum suffering. So here we just have a layer with them. And then we have the layer with our favorite strawberry eater. Now you might be wondering how I got the effects looking so nice with no shading, because shading is very taxing as a one-person animation studio. I try to avoid shading just because I don't want to cry any more than I already have to with the coloring and the line art stage. So what I do is a technique you see in a lot of animated films in the early days, where instead of outright cel shading everything, the color palette of the character changes depending on the light environment they're in. So I took this into account after making my background. I applied the character's reference colors through the same filter, and I was able to color pick those hues and add them to the final animation, so that way when I green screen them in, they would blend seamlessly into the environment and it would look very nice. However, Blender does have some very cool tools that can help me. Here is a rim lighting, which doesn't do the back shading, but it's giving me a nice highlight. And I could have done the back shading with the rim lighting, but the problem is that the silhouettes of the dragons just do not behave well at certain angles. How the rim lighting works is it takes a cutout of what you've already drawn, and then you can kind of move everything around it. So for example, this highlight here is actually, if you were to not clip it, it would be this whole block of like a light yellow. But because of how the rim lighting works, it is restricted to the object you draw, but it will only stay in the shape of the object you draw. So that's why it doesn't always work out well. I mean, you can further blur things, but even then, it can get a little messy, so that's why I avoided that. So here's what the animation would look like with the added lighting. Now the final awesome tool I got to use for the first time with this one is the shadow tool. So what this does is it applies a shadow to your drawing, and you can manipulate it, and then it will just automatically be there. Very convenient. However, for this shot, it doesn't quite work. So that's why I use the non-shadowed footage in combination with the shadowed footage. Whereas here, in this part, the shadow makes a bit more sense on the canvas. Also, you can see the background is shadowing too for some reason. Again, this is just a sketch background, so I just know the general space of where things should be. But that's how I use the shadow effect. Now, note for future self, the shadow effect is a pain to green screen out. So, if you're going to use this effect, I highly recommend importing your backgrounds directly into Blender, at least for these shots. I prefer not to, just because sometimes the quality of the background can degrade, and it's super annoying trying to do parallax effects. Any movement of the background effects within Blender, it's a lot more tough than using a video editor directly. So, here we are with that. Alright, here we are directly in the editor. I made two different versions, with the lens flare and without the lens flare, just because I wasn't sure if it would be easier to do this fade block of color transition within Frozen Gems video editor, or if it would be better just to leave it to be green screened in. Although I think green screening can sometimes be very annoying. And you'll notice that I chose to actually blue screen in everything, and that's just because there's less blue in the overall assets I'm using, and it would just transition better. You don't want these leaves to disappear, so blue screen it is. I have no idea how people get green on green screen to work super well. These are the components I have. You can see some remnants of like my blocking in, and you can even see the map part following mine, just to make sure that it all transitions in nicely together. So we have this leaf animation, and I actually didn't do this in program. I used this in my art program after going through my other animation program, Pencil 2D, which I use for more simple shots. I didn't want the leaves to be super duper animated. I kind of wanted them to be limited just because I thought it would stylistically work better. So here you can see me just manipulating these few images to get the desired effect. Now here we have some of the camera movement. So we see Peacemaker hopping into the foreground, and then up, and then we get to everyone else. How I accomplished this effect, I was actually struggling with it for a while because I'm like, oh no, how do I get them to move up? And I actually had it so Moon and Hope were underneath, so they'd be underneath the bottom of the screen and then everything else would move up. But I realized that in order to keep them on the same plane they should be, I actually had them set above. So if you look at their direction, you'll see them at 990. I used to have them like negative 115, but I put them at 990 so that way they could exist up here. And then as the animation transitioned, they would be where they're supposed to be, and it would look nice and effective and clean and not messy and confusing with what plane they were on. And for the most part, that was the main hurdle in the editing phase I had to go through. But other than that, that's how I made my map part. I hope you enjoy. I'll carry you home. No, you're not.